Howdy, y'all. Welcome back to the Grace Prep Podcast. My name is Joshua Young.
I'm Hattie Lord.
And I'm Jason Powers. I am the lead pastor at River City Church. I am familiar with all of this because when I started to be a pastor here in New Braunfels, we met in, we called it the sanctuary, but I think it's kind of the gathering room at Grace Prep. And so I'm a huge fan of Grace Prep for a long time. I'm glad to be here.
Let's go. That's awesome. Well, Mr. Powers, do I call you Mr. Powers?
Please call me Jason. My friends call me Jason.
Okay.
I'd love that.
Jason,
Okay.
thank you. That sounds so weird.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on
My
today.
pleasure.
I'm super excited
My
for
pleasure.
what this conversation holds. It's going to be a good time.
Good
It's gonna
stuff.
be a good time. Well, before we get started, special thanks to Two Rivers. This is our first podcast inside of Two Rivers.
Oh, that's awesome.
We
Yeah.
got-
Yes.
this is dope.
You're a guinea pig,
Two
Mr.
Rivers.
Powers.
Two Rivers sponsors our podcast. Thank you, Two Rivers, for sponsoring us. We get to have conversations with Jason, which is super dope.
I'm excited.
We get to have coffee. Thank you so much. If you like coffee and you like a place to get homework done, definitely check out Two Rivers. It's got the best coffee and it's got the best atmosphere. It's got the best employees. It's a win-win it checks all your boxes. It's literally great.
It's a great place to be.
Yes, sir.
For
Yes,
sure.
sir. Well, Mr. Powers, you're a pastor at
I
River
am.
City Church.
I am.
And did you originally start in the Grace Prep Sanctuary, or did you have a different location before
Yeah,
that?
okay, so the story of River City is, it's interesting. I started in ministry in 2002. I became the youth pastor at River City Community Church in San Antonio.
Okay.
And it was at that time, I was several years old, but we went, so I did youth ministry for a little while and did some associate ministry. So in 2007, we were in San Antonio. In 2007, there was a couple that lived in New Braunfels, and they started talking about, we want to reach our community. We want to reach New Braunfels. Our friends are there, our families are there.
Yeah.
So we started to ask the question from San Antonio, how could we reach people in New Braunfels? Churches here were great. We love what the churches are doing, all that. But this couple, they had their friends, they weren't in other churches, and so what we did is we planted, it's a multi-site. So the main church in San Antonio, they would have services on Sunday. We would record the services and stream them up here. So in that sanctuary, in that room, there was a big video screen, and the service that was happening in San Antonio was being broadcast here, and there was a group of probably 70, 80, maybe 100 people that were worshiping there at that time. In early 2012, my wife Natalie and I felt like God was calling us away. It's a weird time, like we had always been there. We got married there, our kids were dedicated there. I figured I was gonna be there forever. But we pretty clearly started to feel like it was time for us to do something else, right? And so I told that to my pastor, Sean, the boss there. I just said, hey, I feel like we've got to go. So we basically quit. My wife was on staff as the worship leader there, so she had to quit too. So we lost 100% of our income in one day. We were like, yeah, and so we had to figure it out. And we couldn't get another job, which was weird. I should have been able to get a job. I had experience, all that. But Sean came in about a week later and said, hey, would you guys pray about planting the multi-site venue? So in November of 2012, Natalie and I moved to New Braunfels. We started meeting in that building, and we started processing towards turning the video off. And in January of 2013, we turned the video off. I began preaching at that time, and we became our own independent congregation. So we went from River City Community Church in San Antonio, and at the end of 2012, beginning of 2013, we planted River City Church in New Braunfels. So we call it RCNB, right? River City, New Braunfels. And we've been here ever since.
Wow.
Very cool, very cool. So as I was talking to you before today, you talked about how you were kind of reluctant in a way to go into ministry, and you kind of had some life experiences before that. Can you tell us about your journey going into ministry and ultimately becoming a pastor?
Yeah. My grandfather, my mom's dad, was an Army chaplain, and when he retired, he became a church planter in Houston and Spring. So he was a Southern Baptist preacher for his whole life, all that I knew him. Super smart. So I grew up all around the church, but I had some really painful, hurtful church experiences, right? And so when I was in, if I go to my high school area, right, I had this sense of, I loved the message. Like, I loved ideas of like grace, right? It was beautiful and it was captivating. Love so all of the Christian message was beautiful and resonant with me. But I didn't worship in a place where I saw those beautiful ideas lived out very well, right? And so, and I want to be very careful too. In that place, I was pretty judgmental. My heart, I was not very mature. My heart was very hard, and that's part of it, right? And so I unfairly probably passed judgment on some things that I probably didn't have space to. But at the same time, you know, when you look back at it, so this is a big story of my life, right? Like, very few things make as much sense in the moment as they do 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road, right? So what I see was going on then was, it felt like God was kind of asking me, like, what should it look like? Like, if these ideas of grace and peace and love and goodness and fruit and joy, if those are real, I mean really real, what would that look like if there was 100 or 200 or 1,000 people all committed to those things? What would that look like? So that was the question that came later. But at the time, I'm 18, I graduated from high school, and it just wasn't it. So I went to Abilene Christian University, but I went to play baseball. And so I was playing baseball there, but ACU has a very serious spiritual, you know, plug for Abilene Christian University, right? You go, it's got a serious spiritual culture. So I was there, and it really was competing things, right? Like, I had this spiritual thing. Like, I'm taking Bible classes. I'm going to chapel every day. Like, we're praying in all of our classes, and I have baseball. And the reality is, those are competing allegiances, right? And so what happened over my kind of that first stage at ACU was, it ultimately, and again, the 30-year perspective, it became about worship, right? So I wouldn't have talked about it those times, but for me, worship is what you give your attention to, right? Like, what I focus on, what I give my heart to. And I gave my heart to baseball. And it's all I did. It was if I had a good day on the baseball field, I felt like a good person. Like, I felt like a person of value. If I had a bad day on the baseball field, I didn't know who I was. I wasn't sure, right? So I'm playing college baseball, and it's not like I thought it was going to be, right? I struggled. Everybody in college athletics was the best person in their high school. So I show up, and I'm not the stud that I thought I was going to be. And I did it for about 2.5 years. And I really I knew I wasn't going to go to the major leagues. And so I was just like, well, I'm going to quit. I was tired of my identity being wrapped up in that. So I quit. Well, the problem is then I didn't have anything. And so that's the point really where when I look back on it, I knew it was about worship, right? Because when I quit baseball, I went on this 10-year long, 8, 10, 12-year long search for something to fill, right? Wow. And so this was the worship.
Another thing to find your identity in,
Another
right?
thing to find, right? And so what I started doing was following a band around the country, right? Like, there's this traveling hippie band, Fish. So I was like, hey, we're gonna go. And so I went and saw 20 states and all of these shows and traveled around.
Wow. That's cool.
But it's a good idea, right?
Yeah.
But it was a very lost lifestyle. Lots of drugs, lots of right? And and again, stepping back, right? Like, this is the thing, when I look back on it, so what that was about then was, so I have this, so I'm in Noblesville, Indiana. I'm at a show in Noblesville, Indiana, right? And we're watching, and it's this amazing show, and there's all this stuff on. And so I have this thought, I'm 20-something, 24, 23, 24, and I'm looking around this amphitheater, right? 20,000 people, and I'm looking around, and their eyes are closed, and their hands are raised, and I'm standing back going like, this is worship, like they're worshiping this, right? And so, again, I look back and I see it. But what you realize is it's ultimately empty, right? Like, ultimately, this band that I'm following around, I'm giving my money to, I'm giving my time to, I'm giving my energy to, eventually, those guys are gonna die. And then what? In the same way with baseball, I gave my heart to baseball. But what happens when baseball ends, right? So this becomes this thing that I'm starting to wake up to, and I realize like the problem with all this stuff is eventually it runs out, right? Like eventually the band is gonna retire, eventually baseball is gonna end. And even like, I got to play baseball longer than most people did, right? Like I got to play into my 20s, that's great. But even if I was the best player who ever played the game, I'm 47 now. By the time, there's nobody that's 47 years old that's playing Major League Baseball. Eventually, it's gonna end, right? And so, it wasn't baseball, it wasn't music, it wasn't drugs. I knew, right? Eventually, I'm gonna have to sober up, and I'm gonna have to deal with whatever this is around me, right? And so, for a long time, for years, it was a long, slow process. And I, again, looking back, I see the Lord going, is that gonna fill you? Nope. How about that? Is that gonna fill you? Nope. How about that? Nope. And so it's like one by one, these things just get pulled away. So
I want to pause here
please,
real quick.
jump in, please.
What was your family relationships like
Great
in
question.
this time period?
So that's a great question. So my mom is the godliest person I've ever known. Like she has never stopped praying for me. So one thing I always say, right? Like, well, let me say this. Okay, so my mom was, but my dad was some of the same experiences that impacted me and kind of drove me away, drove my dad away. My brother, when he was a junior in high school, went and got a really good paying job. And his deal was like, you know, he's 19 years old making $40,000 a year. He's like, I am loaded. He's like, I don't need to do it. So really, my mom is clinging to her faith as one by one, me and my mom and my dad and my brother are or my mom is not, but me and my dad and my brother are all walking away. With that said, I have a great relationship with my parents. You know, every family is broken. Every person is broken, right? Like there's sin in every family that makes it difficult. But to this day, we have the kind of relationship where we can talk about things that were hurtful and we could grow. So, but while I was far away from Jesus, I was very destructive to my family. Like it was really hard for my mom. And so
was it because of things you did in actions towards your family?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was a jerk, right? Like, okay, so Galatians 5, right? The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, right? So I believe that in the same way that like the fruit of this plant is this flower, right? Like when you disconnect this flower from the plant, it starts to die, right? It doesn't produce any more flowers, right? So when you're disconnected from Jesus, love dissipates, joy dissipates, peace dissipates, right? And so one of the hard things was like growing up, and I never got to a place where I think in my heart where I really was like, I'm convinced that there's no God, right? I wouldn't have said I was an atheist.
Yeah.
I would have just said it doesn't work, right? It was about filling myself, right? And so I've always been a spiritual person. I've always been aware that there's more than just physicality, right?
Yeah.
So as I'm like doing all this stuff, what I was like, okay, so how can I scratch that spiritual itch without all the like accountability of a sovereign deity, right? Like a God who's gonna hold me accountable, right? And so what I found was Buddhism. And so I practiced Buddhism. Again, like, I mean, I'm 20 some years old, but I meditated a lot. I practiced the ideas, but here's what I came to do. So the idea in Buddhism is, right, the problem is our desires, right? Like, and so if you can just sit still long enough to let your desires dissipate, then you'll be fine and you get to this enlightened place, this nirvana. Now there's a kernel of truth in that, right? Like James says, right? Like what causes wars among you? It's not the desires in your heart. Jesus said, deny yourself, take up your cross, right? So there's a nugget of truth in that, which is important. That's why those kind of ideas are so tempting, right?
Yes, that's why they work to some degree.
Yes,
right?
they draw you in. My problem with all that stuff is they don't go far enough. Here's what I found, right? Like I can sit down, and as long as I'm in my room by myself, I'm a great Buddhist. The problem is I get in my car and people don't do what I want them to do. And then I have to realize, I'm not as peaceful as I thought I was, right? I still have that as a Christian, right? I'm a great Christian as long as I don't have to deal with people who are different from me, or right like that. And so that's the process. So anyway, so I'm this Buddhist, but I'm an increasingly unhealthy, dysfunctional Buddhist, right? Like your habits catch up with you, right? Like you can't live the kind of life that I was living and not have it bear fruit. So one of the things is I'm increasingly alienated from my parents, but I need to have this validation. So I start picking on my mom for her faith. She's a Christian. And so I think fast, I talk fast, I have a philosophical mind, right? So and my mom's not that. She's sweet and gentle and peaceful, right? But I start baiting her. Well, why do you believe that? Why do you go after that? And for about, I don't know, a couple weeks, it's really tense and it's really bad and it's really destroying the relationship. I remember this, like, so there's a day we're in at my parents' house downstairs and I'm picking a fight, right? Just so I can feel validated. And my mom, she looks at me in the eye and she goes, "Stop." She goes, "I will not have this conversation with you again." And she tells me this. She goes, "I don't care what you believe." She said, "My God is strong enough to intervene in your life. That's the end of it. Don't talk to me about it anymore." And so what's my response? I'm like, "You lose, I'm the winner, woo!" Right? I go upstairs because I'm an idiot. And so I go upstairs. This is the story, right? That night, I'm laying in bed. Again, I'm on drugs, right? And I'm laying in my bed and I'm listening to a CD, trying to go to sleep. I don't sleep because I'm anxious. At this point, my life's just a mess. And in the middle of the night, at some point, May 1st, 2001, there's a moment of clarity, right? It's like I'm sober. And what I'm thinking about is the condition of my life, right? Like, so now I'm 8-10 years down the road of trying to fill my life with stuff, with experience, with fame, with accolades, with like all this stuff. And listen, I did a lot. I played college baseball. I traveled the country. I saw all these shows. I did all of these things, right? But I can't run from what I know is real. I'm 26 years old, living in my family's house. I have $100,000 in student loan debt. I don't have a degree. I don't have a job. I don't have a direction. Whatever I thought I was filling myself with, I was empty. And so in that moment, right, all of this is going on. And in that moment, there's a quiet, a peace. And then there's a sense, what does your faith have to do with the condition of your life? And I knew it wasn't talking about my faith in Jesus. It was talking about my faith in baseball or fish or drugs or whatever. And I knew my faith has everything to do with that. I am chasing something that is ultimately limited. It's not going to last forever. It can't save me, because if it could, I would have been saved, right? I wouldn't have needed anything else anymore. And so in that moment, I knew whatever this meant, my life would never not have Jesus at the middle of it, okay? But where I wasn't ready for yet is church. Because church, I had never seen anything that told me that God and church had anything to do with each other, right? Like God was grace and love and peace and joy and fruit and all that stuff. Church was my church experience. My interpretation had been cold and hurtful and and all of those things, right? So I was like, Jesus, I'll follow you wherever you want, but I'm not ready to try this. So I got voracious about the Bible. I started reading the Bible all the time. I started reading C.S. Lewis books. I started reading anything I could get my hand on. And after about a couple of weeks, I got sober. And I got sober because I was like, well, if I'm not sober, I can't read the Bible, and that's what I wanted, right? So it was like, yeah, it was like, it comes back, right? So God takes these things away and he like pours in, and after a couple weeks, I was like, so my hair's like this long. I've got
He's touching his shoulders.
I've got hemp rope necklace. I'm wearing fish shirt. Like I'm a dirty hippie.
Certified hippie.
Dirty hippie, yes. I wouldn't have passed a drug test. And but my mom is at this church, right? And she's like, it's the most life-giving church she's ever been. So these churches that I left, eventually she ends up leaving too, because she sees it, she's bad. Well, she ends up at this other church, River City Community Church. Call themselves a church for real life. And so I'm like, we'll see, I'll go, right? And here's my deal. So my thing in life is, if it doesn't work, I want to know as fast as I can so I can go do something else, right? And so I'm like, church is terrible. I'm going to prove it so I can get on with my, so I show up with my fish shirt and my long hair. I didn't need them to validate me. Yeah. I knew what the Lord had done in my life was real, and I wasn't waiting for them. So my thing is like, I'm going to show up and I'm going to tell my story, every bit of it, and I'm going to make them uncomfortable so they'll judge me, then I can get out, right? And they just never did. Yeah. Like, they asked. Now what they did was, the pastor Sean Azar, I call him a friend and a mentor today, what he did was, he called me when I was full of garbage, right? Like when I said dumb things, he's like, nah, that's not true, right? And he would lovingly confront me. But what he did was, he convinced me that my place wasn't in jeopardy. You know what I mean? My relationship with Sean wasn't in jeopardy because I didn't agree with him or because I wasn't right or whatever. And so very quickly I realized like this is a different kind of place. And at that point, I saw church as a redemptive place. And so what I saw was, I look back and I'm like, okay, so why would I spend all of my money to join a pack of dirty hippies and drive around from town to town, right? And so here's the thing on those lots, right? Like you can find whatever substance you need, you can find food, you can find a ticket to the next show, you can find a ride to the next show, you can find someone to hang out right with. And so I get into church and I'm like, I was looking for community, right? I want people who know my name, who I have a place with, right? So the problem is, community outside of the church is ultimately limited and it's not gonna last. The church though, not perfect, but the good news is this wasn't perfect either. However nice I thought it was at the time, it wasn't, because my life was, I was a degenerate,
traveling with,
yes. But I get to the church and I'm like, this is real because Jesus is never gonna go away. Jesus isn't ever gonna leave me. And figuring it out, and our brokenness isn't the thing that we escape from in that. Our brokenness is the thing that brings us together, right? Like, so we can figure this out. So I've got that. I look at, what was the music about? The music was about worship. I look about, what was the travel about? The travel was about mission and getting places. I'm like, everything I was chasing, I found in Jesus and his mission at the church. There's still not a perfect church. The church is nothing but broken people. Our mission, what we say at River City, we say every Sunday, our confession, right? We say we are badly broken and we are deeply loved. Both of those things have to be true.
Yeah.
If I'm loved because I'm not broken, then I can never misstep, or I may not be loved anymore. But if I am broken and not loved, well, then I'm hopeless. Then I'm just stuck in my, right? So badly broken, deeply loved. And I experienced that at the church. That's when I wanted to be in ministry. And I never thought about leading a church. I thought about, it was youth ministry at the time, I thought about telling middle schoolers and high schoolers that thing that you're searching for is Jesus.
Right.
I'm not trying to invalidate the search. What I'm trying to do is, like, my thing with like Buddhists is, the problem is you stop too short. You stop with the denying ourselves, right? Like, the point isn't to be empty. The point is to be full, right? To be full of Jesus. That's what he said, John 10:10, right? Everyone else wants to steal from you and kill and destroy, but Jesus is like, I came to give you all of life, right? So that was the thing that I wanted to tell middle schoolers and high schoolers, like,
exactly the crux of whenever you broke off and started finding your identity in things and other things.
Yes. I wish somebody had grabbed me and had been like,
I already know the answer.
Yes.
Right?
The thing is, I'm sure that they did. I wasn't ready to hear it, right? And so this is why, though, the church is so important, because I know there are a lot of people like me who they just have to walk it themselves. And that's an important part, right? Because there's people that I can talk to that my wife can't. My wife, like, she came out of the womb praising Jesus, right? Like, she is, everybody has sin, everybody needs Jesus. She definitely does, right? But she didn't have to run from it like I did. She, from an early age, found refuge in Jesus and found refuge in the church, right? And so it takes all of that.
Right, like we need the prodigal story too.
Yes, yes, it's important, right?
Yeah.
Well, because my thing is, like, I can talk about grace in a different way. She talks about the keeping grace of Jesus. I have to talk about the redemptive grace of Jesus. They're both real, they're both amazing, they're both unbelievable stories, but they're different stories, which makes perfect sense because our God is big enough, right?
Yeah,
So all that.
absolutely.
So I don't know that I still don't know that I ever am super keen on like the organizational leadership part of it, right? Like, because a lot of being a pastor at a church is like staff meetings and how do we sign checks and stuff like that. And I care very little about that. It has to happen well, like the church needs to run right.
Exactly.
But my heart is, people are looking for something. I mean, I see it everywhere, right? And again, like if you go back to this idea of worship as attention, right? Like you just look at the things that in our culture we give attention to. We give attention to political leaders, we give attention to celebrities, we give attention to beautiful people, we give it like there's this. And so when we look at that, our hearts go instinctively, what we focus on, our hearts want that, right? What did Jesus say? Where your treasure is, there your heart will be, right? I always feel like it should be different, right? Like, oh, where whatever you love, you'll give your attention to, right? But Jesus is telling us, like, you can train your heart, right? Like, put your attention on it, right? And so if you give all of your attention to beauty, beautiful people, what you're going to come to is, I'm not that. Yeah. And then you're empty. If you give it to riches, I'm not that. To power, I'm not that. But if you give your attention to Jesus, what Jesus says is, I loved you before you were born. He said, I knit you together. I created you. And what Jesus will say is, that mindset is destroying you and I want you to stop. But he says it with love and kindness and goodness and peace, right? And so,
like all you come to is emptiness every time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. And here's the crazy thing, Jesus lets us do that, I think. That's the part for me, I was like, well, Jesus, where were you for those 12 years while I was dying on the vine? And he was like, I was letting you figure it out, right? I was letting you, and that's the hard thing, right? Like, it's not hard, it's just, it's uncomfortable for me when I don't want accountability, right? Like this idea that Jesus is willing to, he's a gentleman. He's not gonna force himself on me. He's gonna let me live in the consequences of the choices and the decisions that I make. I always say, you have to live in the world you create. I tell my kids this, my daughters, right? Like if you, so my two daughters, a sophomore and an 8th grader, and I tell them like, if you are militant about my sister will never wear a piece of my clothing ever, you should expect to live in a world where clothing isn't shared, right? Yeah. But if you say, you can't wear any of my clothes, but I want to wear all of your clothes, now we have a fight, right? Like now we have, and so my heart and passion is like getting into the place where we just go, hey, like, what if we live in a world where instead of stealing your clothes, we just say, hey, whatever's best for you. If I have something that fits you, you should wear it. If it makes you feel good and beautiful and kind, right? Rather than
like hoarding it.
Yeah. And so I think the organizational leadership, I kind of like it. Like there's a part of me that scratches an itch. I can do it a little bit, but my heart is people going, I think I've been chasing something, and I think it's Jesus. And so I wonder what it would look like if instead of all of these other things, I'd start focusing on that. That's when I get fired up, particularly younger people, right?
Yeah, I like, you didn't say this word like explicitly, but when you said giving your attention, placing your identity in these things, it sounds like idolatry. And it's like that becomes like our main focus.
Well, worship on anything that's other than Jesus is idolatry, exactly. Yes. And it kills everything it touches.
Right.
It destroys every relationship. Like, show me a marriage where one of the partners is focused on money all the time, and I'm going to show you a workaholic family that's decaying, right?
Yeah.
But when I just say, even before my love for my wife, my affection is for Jesus.
Right.
Well, what Jesus is going to tell me is like, my wife is sinful. When she gets in her feelings, she's going to say things to me that aren't kind, right? And the same way that I do the same things to her, right? Well, what Jesus says is, you don't have to respond in kind, right? Like you turn the other cheek. It's not like get punched in the face. Turning the other cheek is like, have you seen the old cartoons like with a white glove where he slaps on the back and it's like an insult and a challenge to a duel, right? That's what Jesus is talking about. Like, so if somebody insults you on one side, give them the other side too, right? Jesus tells me I don't have to fight with my wife. I do, because I'm not just like Jesus yet, but that's the goal.
We're still broken.
Yeah, we're still broken, but that's the thing. If I make an idol out of my need to never be disrespected, well, I'm going to live a miserable life because I can't make people disrespect. And this is, I think, honestly, when I think about your generation, I think this is one of the most significant things that you guys face. Is I didn't have access to 8 billion people looking at my pictures telling me that I'm not tall enough, not smart enough, not whatever. Like, that's the world that you guys live in. That is, everybody's going to tell you what you should be focusing on.
Yeah.
That whole concept of like self-image and like placing your validation in what the world thinks of you.
Yeah.
That's going to ultimately be shattered.
Yep.
And you didn't say this, but something that I think is so important is when we focus on Jesus and we don't just love our spouse or our family and we just focus on Jesus, everything will follow suit.
Everything.
And that's like, we don't have to worry about that. Like our yoke is easy, our burden is light. And so that's
it.
beautiful. Yeah.
So, okay, so think about that, right? So 1 John 4 is to say God is love, right? So that is, love is not, love is something that is inherent to his nature. God could no more it's not that God loves, it's that he is love, right? And so self-giving, that's Trinity, Father, Son, and the Spirit, forever, eternally self-giving. The Father is never jealous of the Son. The Spirit is never, resentful of the Father. They all give to each other, right? That's what love is, right? And so that's what he invites us into. Think about it, creation, right? It was Father, and what did he do? He created Adam, his son, right? But what he said, it's not done yet. It's not good. So what did he do? He finished the job. And then it's the Father and the Son and the Spirit. And what does it say? They were naked and unashamed. She saw him. And she wasn't embarrassed by that. He saw her. And it was wide open. And I think that's what human relation is supposed to be. That you talked about self-image, right? And that's an important thing, is like how we see ourselves. Because ultimately our image is we're created in the image of God, right? The goal of being an apprentice of Jesus, I think, is to shrink that gap between what I see about myself and what Jesus sees about me, right? And so when I'm ignoring these, right? I'm 20 years old and I'm ignoring what God says. My self-image is, I'm a world traveler. I'm important because I've seen the States. I'm important because I've seen more fish shows than most people, right? Well, so what? I'm 47 years old now, and that doesn't matter that much, right? But when I get in, Jesus goes, Jason, you're a grower. Like, you're a grower of people. Jason, you are whatever those things are. And I start looking at that. Well, now I start to go, oh yeah, I am a grower of people, right? And the goal is that my self-image is what Jesus' image of me, right? But it's hard. This is where things now, so this is my job as a pastor, is to help people, first of all, want to shrink that gap,
right?
And then know how to shrink that gap.
What has been the hardest for you to, like, come to terms with in terms of like God giving you your identity and your own identity, and what doesn't want to shrink?
Most of it. Most of it. Here's the hardest thing for me. God is far more willing to take a long time than I am, right? Like, God was willing. I'm right now going, so I think in 12 years I'll be almost 60. I spent 12 years walking away from the Lord, and there are so many times, a long time, right? There's so many times that even now I look back and I'm like, Lord, what if you'd have just like kicked me in the pants early and got me, right? But again, that's my thinking, right? The Lord's like, we're going to spend eternity together. I'm not in a hurry.
Don't worry about 12 years.
Yeah, don't worry about 12 years, right? But when I was 22, 12 years was over half my life, right? I'm 47 now, right? And I think about 12 years and I'm like, 12 years ago, my oldest son was 6, and I remember it like it was yesterday. I can smell the air in the room when he was, from 12 years ago. Like it like time shrinks, and that's a thing, right? So that's where, that's the hardest thing, where I go, God doesn't judge winning like I do, right? Like I value getting ahead. I value being first. Like, and even in church, right? Like, and I push back on this as much as I can. But in the United States, it's so easy to value the church by how many people show up, by what you're, right? And we're humans, we look at that, right? And there are great big churches and there are great small churches, because that's not what it's about.
Yeah.
But what it's about is just going, hey, I'm going to accept what the Lord has for me today. And if I pastor a church of 80 people and I'm being faithful to the Lord, that's a win. Even if the guy that pastors a church of 1,000 people up there doesn't. Because when we started, we were 80 people and we were winning because we took a year where we didn't grow. But what we did was, we're not going to gossip about each other. And so what that means is people come to me and gossip, and I'm like, okay, tell her what you just told me, because that's what it's about, right? Mm-hmm. And people, we fought, and it was hard and all that. But after a couple of years, people started to go, like, we can do this.
Yeah.
Like there can be change, but it took years, right? And then I don't have to worry about growing the church. Then people just start going, oh, hey, you should come here. Like, you should come see it. You should come do this.
Come feel the love here.
Yeah.
Feel the love.
Yeah.
That's
exactly.
it. That's my sign off. Feel the love all the time. Feel the love wherever you're at. So, but if it's not about finishing, because it's an eternal game, then really the only thing that matters is right now.
Yeah, the present.
This moment.
That's a word right there.
Yeah,
That's a
I
word.
mean, it really is, right?
Yeah.
Because here's the thing.
That's
So this
so
was the deal with being a
crazy.
Buddhist. This was like left over from my Buddhist, and this is a great thing. Here's what I want to say. I want to talk to parents, okay? Because for 12 years, my mom, she loves Jesus so hard, all she could do is pray. She didn't want to talk to me because I'm yelling at her and we're fighting, right? And so what my mom says now is, she has a ministry to parents whose kids are far away, and what she says is, don't ever stop praying for your kids. Because she says, and a missionary guy told her this, the prayers of a mother, of a parent, are intercontinental ballistic missiles. It doesn't matter where they are, because nobody loves like a parent. Yeah. Nobody loves like a parent, right? Yeah. And that's what's hard, right? Like when someday I hope you guys are going to find the love of your life. And you're going to love your wife and you're going to love your husband as much as you think possible. And then you're going to have a kid. And you're going to go, I would set myself on fire for this little human being. And here's the thing about babies. They're parasites. Like, all they do is take, right? Like your baby doesn't love you. Your baby wants to eat and it cries. Right now, you can train them up to love. That sounds harsh, right? But you can train them up to do. But here's the thing about my son Jackson. My son Jackson, who's an amazing kid. Mm-hmm. He's going to getting a Bible degree. Loves Jesus. Loves me. Like, he will never love me like I love him.
Right.
Never. And so I'm sitting there one day and the Lord's like, yeah, same. The Lord's like, you'll never love me but someday Jackson's going to be a father and he's going to have that, right? And so it's that love that makes our prayers. Why was I start talking about that? I lost my train of thought. Intercontinental. Oh, I was talking to parents. Yeah. Don't stop praying because it took me 12 years to realize there really is nothing else but Jesus. But here's the thing about that now. I'm in danger of my love growing cold, right? Like I'm in danger of just getting bored with my faith, right? But there have been many times where I'm like, where else am I going to go? Am I going to go do drugs? I've already done that. Am I going to go?
Everything else is boring.
Yeah, I've tried all of that. And I know when I was doing that, right? Like when I was on drugs and I had the chance to choose anything in the world, I chose Jesus. I mean, Jesus chose me, right? When I was making money, I chose Jesus, right? And so I'm not going to go back to those things. I mean, I could, I feel like, but I don't want to. Even when it's really hard with Jesus, I have this sense that Jesus saved me, and that's why he took so long. Yeah. That's why sometimes when I go like, God, what are you doing? Why don't you just get me out of this?
Yeah.
I know he generally gets me out of it when I'm ready, so I'm not done learning yet, I think.
Yeah, that really strikes me, the story about your mom, just in general, the fact that she prayed for 12 years, but also that night of her like saying, stop, I won't fight you anymore. Like this is about faith and not about like arguments, whatever. Like this is, God is going to work in your life, and he did,
yes.
you know.
So this is, so every action equal opposite reaction, right? Like every heads coin has, every heads, there's a tail, right? And so one of the great things about being alive right now is we have access to every bit of information in the history of the universe, right? Like we know everything. And so one of the great things is now as believers, we have access to an intelligent, reasonable, coherent defense of our faith in ways that we never have before, right? Like I have the ability to look at a seemingly eternal cosmos and go, I wonder why that is, right? Romans 1:20, all of creation reflects the goodness of God, right? And so I lost my train of thought. What were you saying?
We were talking about your mom and
prayer.
Yes.
Prayer.
So on one hand, we have access to all this information. We can make a reasonable defense in the marketplace, right? So now you look at Acts 17 and Paul's in the Areopagus and he's making this defense, right? The other side of that coin is that we can get so knowledgeable that we stop remembering like what I needed wasn't better information. What I needed was to realize nothing loves me. Nothing loves me except Jesus. Baseball doesn't love me. My parents love me, right? And so that becomes a great thing, right? Okay, well, who loves me in the middle of this? Who does all that? So that's the thing. You can't not have it because what I needed to, I'm a smart guy. Once I got to the place where I knew I need to be loved in my heart, then I need to know, does it make sense?
Right.
And that's where the information is great.
Mm-hmm. So how did your heart change? Because you were opposed intellectually, right, to Christianity, and had these arguments going, and then you had that encounter.
Yeah.
But that doesn't how did that change your mind?
I think that most arguments, right? Most things that we argue about, right? And when I talk about argue, I think of it not as like not as a debate, right? In a debate, like you present your side and you present your side, and at the end, like, hey, we're gonna let the argument stand on the merits, right? An argument is back and forth, right? And it's this kind of entrenched thing. The problem with argument is they're very rarely ultimately about information. If abortion, it's a hot button.
Yeah, it is.
If abortion were about information, everybody would believe the same thing. But it's an interpretation. When does life begin, right? And so, but it's not even ultimately about that. Ultimately, right, it's about who gets to say what I do with my body, right? Well, my thing is like, not me. I didn't create myself. I didn't make myself a man or a woman. I didn't even honestly, like my wife, like we did our part in like making babies, but I know a lot of people who work very hard to have children for their whole life and they don't. My fundamental belief as a believer is it takes God to make a baby. Only God makes children, right? That's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to just lead with. A person who doesn't believe in God, they don't want to hear that. They want to fight with me over the information, right? So my thing is like, if I show up in the marketplace talking about the day of conception or whatever, it's important. We have to do it. We have to say our thing, right? But I need to know I'm probably not going to convince everybody here. That lady, that person is probably not getting an abortion because she hates the tissue that's within her, and she's like that. Sometimes I think it is. She's probably scared to death.
Yeah.
Doesn't know what's going to happen. Maybe like all that. And so that's my place as a church where we just go love away from that.
Yeah.
And that is like, and it's both. And so we have to have the answer, but we have to lead with love. This is the love covers a multitude of sins, right? Like, if I love you enough to know, why are you making this decision that I think is terrible? Why did I leave the church to go play baseball? Yeah. You could have told me all the time, well, baseball's going to end, well, baseball's going to do this. It wasn't about that. It was about identity. It was about who I am. And so that's hard, man. That's a lot of gray area. And again, it's slow. Yeah. And it's not nearly as fruitful as I want it to be. I want to be able to say the words that's going to make everybody agree with me. And this then goes, so what do I do now as a Christian in a world where it seems like a lot of things are going the way that I don't want them to?
Yeah.
right? What's my job now? Staring down the barrel of all this stuff. So, Matthew 5, the Beatitudes, right? Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, right? Those who, and not financial poverty, but those who know sin is a problem and it's my problem, right? Like I know, right? So do you know what the next Beatitudes, right? Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Those who know they need a savior, they get a savior, right? Do you know what the next one is? Blessed are those who mourn, for they'll be comforted, right? So it's not just like, hey, I mourn because my grandma died. The mourning that Jesus is talking about is specifically the mourning over my sin and the sins of the world. So here's as a pastor and as a believer, I grieve over the sin in the world and in the country. I see it everywhere. But my comfort is waiting on the Lord and knowing He gets the last word, not me. He gets the last word, not culture. He gets the last word, not Caesar. He gets the last word, not... Yeah. He gets all the last word. And I can his last word is Revelation 22, right? Revelation 21, right? No more crying, no more tears, no more pain. The old order of things is gone. I know this is going away, right? But what I do is I grieve and I mourn for sin. I mourn for the sin in my life. That's taking the log out of your own eye, right? Like I know I'm selfish, I'm greedy, I'm all of these things. And I look around at the world and I like our economics and our politics and our interpersonal relationships, they're all governed by that. And so I go, Lord, save us. But what I can't do is compromise the principles of the kingdom. Andy Stanley said this: you cannot gain or maintain the blessings of God by violating the principles of God, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You cannot usher in a kingdom of peace with violence.
Yeah.
You cannot usher in a kingdom of grace with legalism, however bad I want to, right? And so my job is to, there's a guy's name is Reinhold Niebuhr, and he wrote a prayer called the Serenity Prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And there's another line in this that says, accepting, as Jesus did, accepting this world as it is, not as I would have it, right? So I think like Jesus came to a broken world and he played by the rules. Yeah. He didn't go to Rome, he went to Jerusalem. He let them beat him up. And that's the part where I go, my role in this world is to be an unceasing voice of truth. Yeah. Whatever you think, that's not true. And an unwavering example of self-giving love, even if it costs me my life.
Right.
I would rather have those who disagree with me kill me in the name of Jesus, and I'm not there yet. That right, like that. I'm not saying that I like that.
That's
this
the,
is
it's
yeah.
the goal.
That's the goal. That's where I want to get.
Yeah.
Yes, like, and again, Jesus said, "Follow me, all the way," because the hope is someday you go to the cross and then you're beyond it. And the thing is, like, if I can get to the point where I truly don't care what you think about me, well, then I'm bulletproof. What are you going to do to me? I don't care whether you like me or don't like me, what you say about me, what you don't say. I'm bulletproof, right? Like I've got one thing. That is where I want to be. Because then what I can do is say, hey, I think that relationship is killing you. And you can call me names and throw things at me. And I can still love you enough to walk with you. You know what I mean? Right. Because I don't care whether you think I'm...
It's like, I love how this like conversation has been like all about love. Like I love that.
Yeah, that's good. So here's what I want to say very quickly though, right? Like, it can be sketchy. People can get nervous in the church if you overemphasize love and don't talk about. And so here's what I want to say, right? Like, a high view of love does not give an inch to sin.
A high view of love is a high view of sin too. You take it seriously.
Yeah. Yes. Because like, okay, so let's talk about, I think, so let's talk about, can we talk about sex? Right, can I talk about this, right? And you just think about like, what's the deal? So the loving thing as a teenager, an unmarried teenager. So what's the loving thing behind purity before marriage? The loving thing is, the Lord wants my wife to not ever have to wonder whether I'm thinking of somebody else. The Lord wants my wife to know that she can be naked and unashamed. Like, that's the goal, right? Like, that's the garden. So a teenager with view and just saying, like, Jesus' way isn't just right, it's best. Like, the best way to get to human flourishing is to follow the commands of Jesus, right? That person for you, and I want to tell your friends, is you should want to have a wonderful marriage, a life-giving marriage that lasts forever. And the best way to do that is to make sure that in this moment right now, you don't know who that person is yet, but you know, Josh, you want your wife someday to know she's the only one you're thinking about, right? Don't you want that?
Yeah, you're seriously loving them right now by seriously fleeing from sin also right now.
So if I mess with that because it feels good, and is that right, like that? Well, and you just go, well, we're both consenting. Well, guess what? Consenting people do dumb stuff all the time. People consent to rob banks together. That's a bad decision, right? Just because you're, right? And so the loving thing is to just say, yeah, I love you enough to consider your future spouse. And I love my future spouse enough, but what I have to do with that is to just say, I am gonna say no to myself. It's not just about what I want to do. My desire is not the ultimate measure of value in this world. It's just something that I like. And you know what I found out? If I wait 10 minutes, I'll want something else, right? Yeah. So you don't have to chase down everything that you want.
Yeah.
That's so good.
I'm gonna keep trying to.
That's so good.
Yeah. But honestly, like, I mean, you can't. It's a noble desire to want to make sure that the church knows sin is serious business. Don't coddle it, right? Yeah. But how we deal with it is every bit. I mean, we read Romans 1 is this theological masterpiece, right? Like, they didn't glorify God. They didn't, like, oh my gosh, and all that, right? And then and you just read it and you're like, oh, and all this, right? Like, they denied him and they gave themselves over to what was shameful. And we're like, yeah. And then you go, Romans 2, right? And so were some of you when he found you. And Romans 2:4 says, it's his kindness that led us to repentance. And so this is, okay, so now this is the heart work, right? When I'm like going at, like, and I've got enough theological information in my head to do damage, right? Someone's in, right? The question I have to ask is, do I want to win this argument or do I want them to repent? If I want them to repent, kindness. That's Jesus chose that to me. Do I know better than Jesus? I don't think so. So I'm going to lean in with kindness, right? Yeah. If I just want to win, and sometimes I just want to win because I'm sinful and selfish. I'm badly broken, right? If I just want to win, then I get to just say everything that I know, and I get to have all the information. I get to tell you, and I get to walk out and go, well, they didn't have that. But if I love them and I want them to repent, I'll take as long as it takes. I take as long, whatever, and then the hope is that they would go, why are you being so nice to me?
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Why are you doing this? And then I get to say, well, I just think Jesus loves you. And so I try to love the things that Jesus loves as much as he does, and that's you. And so, like it or not, that's going to happen. This is my story. Do you have time? I talk so much, right? I know.
You're good.
Okay, so
you're good.
So when I was I was a freshman at Abilene Christian, and I was living in the dorm. And again, like I did not exemplify the Abilene Christian code of conduct. So I was walking down the dorm room hall one time, and I'd probably been drinking, and there was a guy that was on the baseball team named Jason. His name was Jason Noble. I would love it if Jason Noble somehow stumbled onto this. I think he's a pastor in North Carolina right now somewhere. But anyway,
I've heard the name.
I hope. So Lord, get this into his hands, right? So this guy Jason Noble.
Hello, Jason.
Yeah, that's right. We played baseball together, and I'm being an idiot, and he just goes, "Hey, come here," right? And so I go in his room and I sit on his desk, and he goes, "I'm going to show you something that I don't show very many people." I was like, okay, and so he takes his Bible out And I was like, I grew up in the church. I knew all the Bible verses. I was like, I know the Bible. You're not going to tell me right. He opens it and he goes, this is my prayer list. Whoa. And my name was right there on the top of it. And I was like, well, why are you doing that? And he goes, I don't know. He's like, I just feel like I'm supposed to pray for you. Wow. I just feel like I'm supposed to do that. And so I'm going to do it. And it freaked me out. I was like, okay. So that night I'm at my mom's house and I'm freaking out and I'm having this moment and God's getting me and I'm like, I just guess who I think of? Jason Noble. I believe that, and it had been a long time, 10 years. I believe that the prayers that Jason Noble, I believe that God heard those prayers. And so that's why I want him to know. I can't get in touch with him. I can't find him, right? But yeah, I believe that. I believe that the prayers work. I believe that God hears. But that was the thing. There were plenty of people on the Abilene Christian dorm hall who wagged fingers at me. Mm-hmm. It allowed me to feel morally superior to them. Oh, you're judging me. You don't know that.
Right.
I knew when I left Jason Noble's room, I knew he's different from me. Yeah. He's like, we're both at the same place. We had a Bible class. We were in the same, but I knew in my heart, whatever I would tell outside, and I was 10 years before I'd be able to, that one act of him inviting me in, sitting with me, praying for me, not like, I knew that's different, right? All the stuff I didn't see about grace and love in my churches, I saw in Jason Noble. It was a long time before I could process that, but it all get in there. And so that's my thing for you, Josh. That's my thing for you. Is like, let you be. You want people to go like 20 years ago, like Christians are judgmental and mean and whatever. But man, Hattie she was just different. You want to be the reason that people can't dismiss Jesus. And so sometimes like you yell at them or you get mad at them in the coffee shop or whatever. Well, in that case, apologize, ask for forgiveness, go make it right, do those things, and then the church becomes this thing that it's not about whether people disagree with us or not. It's about whether people can ignore us or not, and that's the thing, right? Like dumb arguments are easy to ignore, right? Like there's all kinds of stuff I'm not even think about that, right?
Yeah.
But a compelling example, that's moving.
Yeah.
And that's what church is supposed to be.
Exactly. What Jason Noble did was just love you, like completely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
and
good.
what's funny is I love that you said that. I've never thought of it in those terms, but that's it. And what's crazy is I knew that being prayed for meant love. I don't even know that at that time. I don't know what I believed about prayer. I don't know that I'd have prayed sincerely, but I knew for him, that's the best that he's going to give me. That's significant for him, and it was powerful. Yeah. And so that's a good thing, to tell somebody, hey, I'm praying for you, in an authentic, not like in a the Christian blow off, right?
Yeah,
right? I'll pray about it, right?
Yeah.
But in a way where you're sitting with them and you just go, hey, I don't have any answers for your pain. But man, I'm going to pray for you, and I'm going to ask you about it tomorrow. I think it's powerful and compelling. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, what if that was in church, right? If we were doing that, we were just like, hey, I think people would come back to us. Yeah. And I think they would go, hey, tell me about that, or whatever. So it's good.
Love is the key.
Right?
There
Love
you go.
hard, though. That's the thing, right? Okay, so Jesus in John 13, right? And says, this is the command that I give you. He didn't say just go figure out how to love them. He said, love them like I've loved you, right? Like we don't get to just, because we don't understand that, because we would love by the culture, by our age, right? Yeah. She said, love like I did. And
not like with just tolerance.
Tolerance or feelings or so. Jesus is like, hey, I love you. I'm going to go get up on that cross and let him murder me for you.
Yeah. Ultimate example of love.
Yep, that's a high calling, right?
Yeah.
Boy. But at the end of the day, here's the thing. So this is the reason. Even in my I'm a pastor, lead pastor, but I would say I'm really just a youth pastor for big people, right? I really feel like
I love that.
I do because here's the thing about you guys, and I hope that doesn't sound condescending in any way, because I want you to know I believe. Here's the thing I believe about you. Your dreams have not yet been beaten down by just having to pay the bills. Yeah. You know what I mean? By just like by having to do, whatever. And so what I want to say for you is like believe that God can do crazy things, and don't wait for someone who's 50 to give you permission to go love people well. Because honestly, the reality is we probably won't. We're not very good at that. So what I say to your generation is learn. There are things that old guys like me have learned from just getting our teeth kicked in, right? About humility, about waiting, right? The hardest thing when you're young is waiting. Because listen, a day is a much bigger part of your life than it is my life, right? Like you guys are 18 years old, so one day is one, whatever that number is. At 47, dude, one day is nothing, right? It's nothing. So, so from older people, learn patience, learn to wait, but don't learn our lack of compassion. Don't learn sometimes our lack of whatever it is. Jeremiah was a young man. Mary in Scripture was a young lady. John, the apostle whom Jesus loved, was a young teenager. And I think there's a reason for that. And so I believe in your generation. I believe we need your generation, but we don't need your generation to just be like, next up, like we need a bold, a revival generation that just says we're going to worship our God unashamedly, and we're going to call people to that, and I believe it can happen. And so y'all go do it.
Exactly.
Do it.
Exactly.
Do it.
I'm so excited. So excited. Our generation's got a lot of potential.
You do have a lot of potential,
and we need to pray for our generation.
Yes. So that's the thing, right? Like, so when,
parents, you got that?
yeah, that's good, right? So when Paul tells Timothy, right? Like, you hear this every time you get a guest speaker that wants to come talk to you, right? Like, don't let anyone look down on you because you're young, right? Everybody hears that. That's not the meat of the verse is set an example for the believers in life, love, speech, purity, right? That's the thing. People my generation here, what they're gonna tell you is, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Like,
so
one of the ways people look down on this is like the low expectations.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Listen, I don't have low expectations from you. I have high expectations of you. I think you should change the world. So don't worry about what they say to you, right? Like lean into prayer.
Right.
Like lean into it, and that's how you set an example. Like, oh, hey, you guys run around and fight and stuff. We're gonna pray for a week. We're gonna fast and pray, and then we're gonna move, right? And so, I think for your generation, serious spiritual disciplines are huge. Like fast, like just say, I'm not eating today. As Grace Preparatory Academy, right? Like if we believe that our elections are significant and crucial and vital, and that every election that we have is, before we say who we think you ought to vote for, we should fast and pray that God's will be done. And my thing is like, I'm going to vote. I have ideas, but I'm not going to tell anybody else, because I think it's possible that God leads people, and I don't think he's ever going to say, hey, you should kill that person. He's going to say you should divorce her. But I do think that God is far more interested in us submitting to each other and humbling each other than being right. He's right, we're not right anyway, right? And so fast and pray for our nation and then go vote, right? Fast and pray for our nation and then have important conversations about gender and identity and sexuality and economy, because those are important things, but they don't lead the conversation. They're the application of a conversation about, is the kingdom of heaven at hand or not?
Yeah.
Well,
I love you guys. Y'all are awesome.
Yeah, I think that's a great
I don't know,
way
man. I got a lot. I'll never stop talking until you tell me to. So keep going.
I think that's it. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. I'll come back anytime you want.
Awesome.
Happy to talk.
Awesome. Love to hear that. Well, we need to do the customary handshake, right?
Okay.
Handshake?
Thank you for coming.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love it. I love it. Yeah.
All right.
And then, yeah, we also, at the end of each podcast, we say deuces, which is so random.
Deuces.
Deuces.
On three. One, two,
okay.
three.
Deuces. You guys are great.
Thank you so much for coming.
It's my pleasure.
Genuinely,
My pleasure.
that was a great conversation.
Good.